Hello again and welcome to Philosophy and the Good Life. I'm Chris Fleming from the School of Humanities and Languages at the University of Western Sydney, and this is the Week 6 wrap-up. Now, this week we began a 3-week block on the Stoics, and as part of this first block we were looking at Marcus Aurelius and particularly his book The Meditations, which is a very unusual book. It's certainly a very unusual book in terms of the history of philosophy, and that's for a couple of reasons. The first is that Marcus Aurelius wrote this not as a book to be published or even something that he would teach from, but rather it was a diary. Sometimes that over the years, over the centuries, Meditations has been translated, that is, the title has been translated to myself or to himself, to reflect this origin as a diary. So that is one of the unusual things about it. Now, what that tends to have an impact on are a whole number of features of the Meditations. One of these is that it's not really a book that is terribly concerned with arguing a point. That is, a lot of philosophy tends to proceed by trying to convince you of a particular conclusion through a series of intermediate steps, so they'll cite evidence, move towards a kind of midpoint, then bring it all home with a conclusion that flows on from that. Now, Marcus Aurelius is not really interested in that, and obviously one of the reasons is he doesn't have to convince himself of anything. These are the things that he wrote to himself. So that's one of the features of the Meditations, in terms of their structure and as part of their genre. Another is that it doesn't really have a sequential development, so you're not seeing it beginning a particular way and then ending a particular way as the argument proceeds. Rather, they are a series of, as the book title suggests, meditations, where a certain number of points are kind of put through in a circular fashion. That is, they're cycled or repeated throughout the book. Again, I'll return to that in a moment. Now, the other feature of it that is very unusual is the fact that it's written by an emperor. Now, we don't have any other examples of emperor, let alone emperor diaries, but emperor philosophy. Now, why this is significant is that the image or the idea of the philosopher king was a popular one in antiquity. In ancient thought, and you see this best articulated by Plato in the Republic and in Laws, that he has this ideal of the philosopher king. So that the idea is that the person most fit to rule politically is the philosopher, because they're the person who knows the good and so on. Now, this is not a thesis that has been met very sympathetically, especially in the 20th century, because it's been seen as a kind of elitism, and it's been seen as a kind of possible kind of totalitarianism, right? So that the philosopher simply is supposed to rule because they've got a certain education. That strikes a lot of us in the contemporary world as heading down a very bad path. Now, whether Plato exactly meant that kind of despotic rule is open to open to question. But in any case, Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher and he was a king. He was the emperor of Rome from 161 of the Common Era till, I think, 180. Yeah, 180, when he died in battle under slightly mysterious circumstances. Ridley Scott in the movie Gladiator portrays a scene, or films a scene, where Marcus Aurelius is killed by his son Commodus. Now, whether that happened, we don't know. It's possible, but I'm not going to go into that. In any case, the book Meditations, if there's any structure to it at all, that's divided into 2 sections. And the first section is the first chapter, and then you have chapters 2 to 12. Now, what distinguishes these is in the first chapter, Marcus Aurelius is really just giving a roll call of all the people that he wants to thank for the impacts that they have had on his life and the kind of virtues that they bring into the world and how he appreciates those. Now this is an interesting chapter, partly because it's so different from all the chapters that follow, and partly because he gives you in a very shorthand form a list of the sorts of virtues that he considers to be admirable. So one of these that stands out is simplicity. Simplicity meaning that you live a simple life, even if you're a person of great wealth. There's this virtue of eating simply, sleeping in simple quarters, not overcomplicating your life with material goods. And this was one of these virtues in ancient Rome that was more often cited than it was observed, but there is some indication that Marcus Aurelius himself did observe, at least to some degree, this ideal of simplicity. Also mentioned in the list of thank yous is the virtue of piety. Now, piety these days means to us a kind of holier-than-thou religiousness, or something to that effect. That's not quite what piety means in this context, although it's hard to think of a better English word. Really, one of the features of piety that was very important in the context of Marcus Aurelius's thought was humility. That is, if you have deference to the gods, you don't think that you're one, or you don't think other humans are gods, but you, in fact, will submit to principles that are higher than yourself. So there's this kind of humility. Anyway, there are a number of virtues that are listed in the introduction. Then from chapters 2 to 12, you have this cycling of themes that again and again, and you can have a look at the PowerPoint for this week to see the particular themes that Marcus Aurelius or my take, at least, on the themes that Marcus Aurelius circles around. So, for instance, he again and again emphasises the necessity of following nature, or the natural order, and that nature is synonymous with God or providence, and this is the right way to virtue and truth. There is, again, one of the themes is this notion of context. So the idea that we are mortal beings living in a vast universe, and that we shouldn't get too hung up about our little corner of it. That is, hold on to kind of resentments, get over obsessed or over involved in our own affairs, which in the ultimate scheme of things are fairly minor. There is a praise of virtue, and again here he's kind of coming out against the Epicureans. This is implicit in a lot of Stoic work, which I will talk about next week when we get to Epictetus, and a praise of virtue. Again, so you harking back to Plato and harking back to Aristotle. You have also a praise of world citizenship or civic service. And in any case, what you will see is this, as I say, this cycling of a number of themes that go throughout the meditations. Now, what this means is it's a difficult book to kind of sit down and read from cover to cover. It's probably not even meant to be read like that, if it is meant to be read in any particular way. It's a good book for dipping into and reading half a page or a couple of these things and thinking about the points that are raised. Now, this is a book that has been in circulation for many, many centuries. It was first translated into English in the 16th century and has not been out of publication since, and it's available in dozens of languages. Now, one of the questions is why? What is its enduring popularity? One of the reasons is perhaps it speaks so clearly to anxieties that many of us have, or perhaps all of us have, about how to live a good life. Whether or not Marcus Aurelius provides good enough answers for any of us or any of you, it certainly addresses itself to those kinds of ideas and issues. And this is a reason that he has come into increasing focus in contemporary philosophical work. Pierre Hadot is one of these interpreters, Foucault in his History of Sexuality, Van Ackeren more recently. These are all thinkers who have seen the importance of Hellenistic thought, that is, that Greek-Roman thought that comes after Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and he's part of this tradition, and there's been, as I say, an increasing reassessment of the importance of this era in philosophical history, which until recently had been relatively overlooked. Anyway, so next week we're going to have a look at Epictetus's Enchiridion, which was a huge influence on Marcus Aurelius, and we'll be stepping back a bit and having a look at Stoicism more broadly as a philosophical movement, some of its basic tenets, and the kind of influence and the legacy that it has had. Well, I'll leave it there, and have a good week, and hopefully see you in the seminars.